So I'd like to say first of all how delighted I am to see you all here. I think we're going to enjoy the speeches of our guests this afternoon, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing them. Thank you all for coming. I should like to give a special thanks to David Allen and Colin Porter, who were so eager to come to our conference that they were thinking of coming last weekend. Also thank you to Stephen, Val and Bridget for their work in helping to organise this meeting. I hope that you will all have a great day. As our regulars will know, I usually make a joke at the beginning of my speech in which one of my aims and objects is to get Stephen Morris here to laugh. As you may know, it's not always an easy task. However, I think even he will be amused at this story, which is not really technically a joke, but nevertheless amusing. So, ladies and gentlemen, we married men do rely very much on our wives to keep us up to the mark. So I thought my wife would have liked to have heard a bit of feedback that I had recently. I had a meeting with a potential candidate for police commissionership who kindly wrote to me to say, I came away from our meeting realising that I'd been in the presence of a formidable chap. So thanks again for your time and generous tea and scones and shared insights. Again, I congratulate you on your stamina and bloody-mindedness in setting up the TEDs. So, ladies and gentlemen, I feel rather chuffed about this. So I read it to my sweet wife, whose response was, "What? Is he gay?" Anyway, I did get a bit of a smile out of Stephen there. Ladies and gentlemen, as all our regular attenders know, I generally do a sort of quick survey of the state of politics in our great, though sorely put upon country. For all of us gathered here who are both eccentric enough not only to be interested in politics, but also to be patriots, I think things are becoming more and more interesting, and maybe also encouraging as we get closer and closer to the inevitable general election, which must by law be held on or before the 28th of January 2025. If Rishi Sunak, or whoever the latest beneficiary of an internal Conservative parliamentary party coup may be at the time, does not ask the King to dissolve Parliament and call an election before the 17th of December this year, then the date will automatically be the 28th of January 2025. Again, for us eccentrics, those of us that Jim would call crazed political types. Is that right, Jim?
Almost.
There have been a slew of exciting opinion polls whose results have suggested that the Conservatives are now down to a predicted vote of about 20%. A predicted vote of about 20% of those that will vote. The commentator Patrick O'Flynn has suggested that might actually be just 14% in some of these polls, because the 20% is the figure that's been adjusted. In any case, the thing that is most interesting about that is that it is below 26%. Stephen, would you ask me why 26%?
Why 26%?
Thank you, Stephen. 26% of the votes in a general election, or thereabouts, is the lower tipping point of the first-past-the-post system of voting. We have been repeatedly told over the decades that the first-past-the-post voting system forces politics into a two-party model. And of course, for decades now, ever since the war, that has been the case. Before the war, I remind those interested in political history, that wasn't the case, as we had shifting balances of the parties and coalitions. It was the war and wartime government which led to the post-war two-party system. But back to 26% of the vote in a general election. A perfect example from UK political history is 1983. In the 1983 general election, ladies and gentlemen, Labour got 8,456,934 votes, 8.5 million round terms, which was 27.6% of the vote. Notice, slightly above 26%. The SDP Liberal Alliance got 7,700,000 780,949 votes. 7.75 million, or thereabouts. That was 25.4% of the vote. So just below the 26% tipping point. This led to the astonishingly disproportionate results of 209 seats for Labour and 23 seats for the Liberal SDP alliance. This vividly demonstrates just how disproportionate the first-past-the-post system is. Going back to the first of those opinion polls, which was a YouGov poll, it was the first opinion poll which really drew attention to where the Conservatives now are in terms of potential vote at the next general election. It was commissioned by Lord Moylan, who is a Conservative peer, and who is, I think, an actual Conservative, rather than the type that we're all too used to, which is a Lib Dem masquerading as a Conservative. Lord Moylan's poll showed that the Conservatives were on about 23%. And there have since been ones that are lower than that. It was a larger sample than usual for YouGov polls. It was nearly 4,000 contributors rather than just less than 2,000, which is their normal number. So, ladies and gentlemen, factoring in the effect of the tipping point inherent in the first past the post, the estimated number of Conservative seats after the general election was down from the current number of Conservative seats, which is currently 348, given that they've lost several seats since. 348. So Lord Moylan's prediction was that the Conservatives, after the general election, would have 12 seats in the House of Commons.
Too many.
That's right. That's right. It's just 12.
Who were the 12 MPs who will still be there?
That's not part of the prediction. I know that some sceptical people will find that hard to credit, but ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you what happened in Canada in 1993. Now, the first thing to say about Canada is that it's also first past the post. So it is completely analogous to our system. This is what happened to the progressive Conservative government in the Canadian 1993 federal election. They went from 156 seats, which is a majority in the Canadian House of Commons, and from being in government down to 2 seats. And even the Prime Minister lost her seat. The highly encouraging point is that the Progressive Conservative Party was irretrievably damaged and ceased to exist, never again becoming a governing party. Their politics, as their name sounds, were very similar to the current UK fake Conservatives, who are in fact progressives on every policy, although they are perhaps more adept at lying about it than the Canadian party was, who actually called themselves Progressive Conservatives. The other quirk, which may amuse you, is that in the Canadian 1993 election, the party that really pushed the Progressive Conservatives over the edge was called Reform. In that election, Reform took many traditionalist and socially conservative voters off the Progressive Conservatives and helped to cause their total collapse. Reform, however, never became a governing party in Canada and has now disappeared. But it was the icebreaker that caused the realignment of Canadian politics. So, ladies and gentlemen, the excitement of the coming year is that we might wind up at last with one of the 2 limbs of the Uni Party crumbling to dust. The commentator Peter Hitchens has long said that it is only when one of the legacy parties collapses that the other will collapse too. I do note that Professor Matthew Goodwin is hedging his bets a bit on this. The other thing, of course, is what happened in Canada was that the equivalent of Labour also realigned. And you can already see some aspects of how the Labour coalition might collapse after a great victory. We have the Corbynite and the Galloway tendency, for a start, which are already starting the splinter there. We already see some of Labour's former MPs in the Workers' Party of Great Britain, George Galloway, and opposed to them we see the technocratic, social democratic tendency of Keir Starmer, and Labour could easily become two or three parties in the absence of proper opposition. So far as the Conservatives are concerned, you might say that they will recover, but of course they may follow the Canadian example and never do so. After all, their membership is already quite small for a party of government. It's worth noting that they claim to have about 150,000 members, but if you look at their accounts, you really cannot come up with an estimate of paid membership of greater than 50,000. By contrast, ladies and gentlemen, when I was born, long ago of course, in the late 50s, they had 2.5 million members, paid up members. And now they're down to, even by their own account, 150,000. As I say, more realistically, 50,000. So the Conservatives are not a mass party anymore. They are propped up by very large donations from big business, often in return for favours. Rather opportunely for me, we've got the Hester discussion, haven't we? You know, he's somebody who has benefited from close connections with government in getting government contracts to make him hugely rich. And in return, he has given donations, we are told, of something in the order of £10 million. And they're now negotiating, I saw recently, for another £5 million. I'll give you another example of such a favour. The big insurance companies were wanting to reduce their payouts for whiplash injuries in road traffic accidents. In return for about £9 million in donations to Conservative Party election funds, they have got a change of law enacted to cause a significant reduction of whiplash compensation. It's now a quarter of what it was before this change of the law. They have also got a system for making claims, which has to be through an online portal, run of course by the insurance industry. And it's very discouraging and difficult to operate. This has all led to vastly fewer claims and so much greater profits and so much larger directors' bonuses, but no reduction, of course, in our payments to the insurance companies. When it becomes clear that the Conservatives will never be in government again, these donations will dry up entirely, as happened to the Progressive Conservatives in Canada, which of course led to them ceasing to exist. There was then a great realignment of Canadian politics, a realignment which I look forward to here. And I'm sure everyone in this room looks forward to that also. You, Colin? Good. I do think that Rishi Sunak's hysterical outburst on the steps of 10 Downing Street 10 days or so ago shows that he's beginning to realise how desperate his and his party's situation is. So, ladies and gentlemen, this year could genuinely be an exciting year for real change for politics in England and in the UK generally. The year in which finally, the wholly outdated post-war two-party system is finally shaken off. In a way, a good sign of possible change was the election of George Galloway in Rochdale and the poor results for all the establishment parties. To misquote George Galloway, they were the two cheeks of the same backside and the bit in between. I'll leave that one to your imagination as to which party that is. However, it was worth bearing in mind, before we gloat too much, that in the Rochdale by-election, one of the features of that election was that not only did George Galloway win half of the votes of Muslims in Rochdale, but also that the over 60% of the Rochdale constituency who are English sat on their lazy, apathetic backsides, still hoping that they, the mythical, benign establishment, that they would sort it out. Perhaps those idle voters were thinking that they were doing something for their community by supporting their football team from their sofa with a six-pack. Well, I have here an excellent quotation from the Irish nationalist Patrick Pearse, whose book was given to me a while back. That I have a huge pile of books, and I gradually work my way, and eventually a book that's given to me that I generally read. But he was one of the leaders of the Easter Rebellion in 1916, and he said, "It comes to this: a man cannot save his people unless the people themselves have some manhood. A man, even if he be a man god, will live and die in vain for all who are voluntary slaves. Christ cannot save you if you want to be damned, much less can any earthly hero." That's quite a sobering saying, and does show that we do need to find some way of energising the English to fight for their rights. Normally in my conference speeches, ladies and gentlemen, I could find myself talking about mainly political matters. However, I do think I should mention the ongoing process of politicisation of the police and the courts. Lots of people have noticed that it is very much a two-tier approach to dealing with public order matters. This was just recently highlighted on one of the Saturday marches, when someone dared to put up a placard saying that Hamas are terrorists, which of course is exactly the official government position. Nevertheless, it was him that was arrested, and his placard screwed up by the Metropolitan Police as he was being arrested. He was arrested with some degree of force and pushed to the ground with some minor injuries. The Hamas supporters in the demonstration, who were in the process of attacking him, were of course not arrested. The Metropolitan Police then put out a duplicitous statement claiming that this guy was arrested for his own protection and then de-arrested. Obviously, Mayor Khan, as the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, certainly won't hold the Metropolitan Police to any account for this appalling display of bias and of two-tier policing. It also vividly exposes the Prime Minister's 10 Downing Street comments as almost totally without effect. We've also had the recent conviction and sentencing of Sam Mealy of Patriotic Alternative. The subject matter of Sam's conviction was the production of stickers saying such things as "It's okay to be white," "White Lives Matter," "Labour loves Muslim rape gangs," "We will be a minority in our homeland by 2066," and "Mass immigration is white genocide." During the trial, ladies and gentlemen, the prosecution were at pains to say that nothing in the stickers was illegal. You might agree with it, you might not agree with it, but it wasn't illegal. Consequently, Sam's conviction was for nothing more than his intention in producing these stickers, which was claimed to be to stir up racial tension. Accordingly, this conviction and sentencing really is a naked example of a conviction for thought crime only. Unlike the female Hamas supporters a couple of weeks ago in the Westminster Magistrates Court, who were convicted of displaying images of paragliders such as were used by Hamas to attack and murder Israelis on 7th of October, where, in that case, their Muslim judge, who has been reported as having liked social media posts which were anti-Israeli, this judge, known to some in the room here, gave them a conditional discharge. Well, ladies and gentlemen, a conditional discharge, I would say, is the legal equivalent of a slap on the hand where there's no physical contact. Sam Mealy, on the other hand, was sentenced by a judge who on his social media seems to be a keen supporter of Nelson Mandela. He sentenced Sam to 2 years immediate custodial for his anti-woke thought crime. The only positive aspect of this is that 2 years for thought crime has attracted widespread condemnation, not only in England, but also in the United States, with even Elon Musk saying it was appalling, and commentators as far away as Australia also saying that it is appalling and indeed shocking that the system is as corrupted as it is. It has therefore been brought attention to just how dodgy our criminal justice system has now become in England, due to the evasiveness of judges and senior police officers who are selected primarily on the grounds of being woke social justice warriors. Ladies and gentlemen, there's also the question of a more geostrategic level situation of just how far gone our woke armed forces are. The numbers in the armed forces are at their lowest number for centuries, and also political correctness is pervasive. The second most senior general in the army, who is a woman officer called Lieutenant General Dame Sharon Neesmith, she has called for the patriarchal and hierarchical nature of the army to be dismantled. There was also a recent controversy in the Royal Air Force, which has been found to have unlawfully discriminated against hateful white male recruits to be fighter pilots. The net effect is, as the Daily Telegraph correspondent Con Coughlin said in a recent article, wokery doesn't win wars, it guarantees defeat. This is particularly the case when you consider how woefully ill-equipped the British Army is. When you consider that not only is the army smaller than ever in recent times, but it actually has far less equipment than it should have. Much of its best equipment has been given to the Ukraine. I gather there's now a whole regiment of artillery with no guns or ammunition. Most of the other artillery regiments have little or no ammunition. Our tanks, out of a fleet of notionally some 200, have only about 40 that are in working order, and they are obsolescent. The army thinks that it will take 3 years to get to the point where they could deploy a single division on the battlefield. And they think that that division will be seriously under-equipped by comparison to any of the 40-odd Russian divisions. The Armed Forces chiefs and military experts reported to the Commons Defence Select Committee quite recently in a report entitled Obsolescent and Outgunned. It warned that were the British Army to have to fight a peer adversary, you can take that as a euphemism for Russia, in Eastern Europe in the next few years, whilst our soldiers, they said, would undoubtedly remain amongst the finest in the world, they would be disgracefully forced into battle in a combination of obsolescent or even obsolete armoured vehicles, most of them at least 30 years old or more, with poor mechanical reliability, very heavily outgunned by more modern missile and artillery systems, and chronically lacking in adequate air defence. They would have only a handful of long-delayed new generation vehicles gradually trickling in due to bureaucratic procrastination, military indecision, financial mismanagement, and general ineptitude. Ladies and gentlemen, that wasn't enough. Brigadier Ben Barry, Senior Fellow for Land Warfare at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, warned that any UK division would have half the anti-armour capability, only 30% of the tanks of a Russian tank division, 2/3 of the armoured infantry fighting vehicles, and 20% of the anti-tank guided weapons, and 15% of the self-propelled artillery. He went on to say, it would be very difficult for that reduced division to stop a Russian tank division. A Russian tank division would seriously overmatch, he said, the reduced division, British Army division. Ladies and gentlemen, overmatched is of course a very polite and clinical way of saying that our division, our single division, would be defeated. We did, at one stage, put forward proposals that we should be campaigning for peace rather than for war. I will get somebody to hand out the leaflets in due course. But the result of what I've just said means that if the stupidity and incompetence of British political leadership gets us into a shooting war with Russia, then the British Army is very likely to be defeated on the battlefield. If we turn to the Royal Navy, the situation is in many ways even more dire. So we haven't even got the aircraft to go on the aircraft carriers, which don't seem to work very well, let alone the ships to support an aircraft carrier-based fleet. So it would be probable that the Royal Navy would also be defeated. We then have the gathering storm in the Middle East around Israel. Not only the Hamas fighters in Gaza, but Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, and the increasing threat of Iran as one of the leading regional powers. It was in answer to this that Grant Shapps recently chose to remove the last Royal Naval vessels patrolling near the Falklands and to put them to use in roles which are supportive of Israel. The result is, ladies and gentlemen, that the Falklands are now largely unprotected, in just the same way as they were just before the Falklands War. The British government has learnt nothing about handling the Argentinians by that war. They are now again talking about sharing sovereignty with Argentina. Those of us longer in the tooth than most will remember that these were exactly the things that the Thatcher government did, which encouraged General Gualtieri to invade the Falklands. We again now have a president of Argentina who is very keen to reclaim the Falkland Islands, aka Las Malvinas. And I might add, I gather he's in the process of purchasing ships, warships, submarines, and aircraft. So there might be a real issue there coming on. My son is currently in the Falklands with the Grenadier Guards, and I'm rather hoping that the Argentinian invasion won't take place until next spring, when he'll be back in England. As the British government has stripped away most of the defences of the Falklands, I think it probable that the Argentinian invasion would be successful, and that once established, the British Armed Forces no longer have anywhere near the capacity to be able to retake the Falklands. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're moving into a period where the British state has got us to the point where it may well be defeated in battle. This is an uncharted territory, but I do note that states that are defeated in battle often collapse, which I think is a sobering reflection on the challenges that we may face over the course of the next 10 years. It would be the British state that is defeated, of course. The UK is, of course, as the video showed earlier, in some senses a multinational imperial state. Empires in particular are very susceptible to collapse in the event of military defeat. I would expect independent nation states to arise out of the ashes of the British state. So that's a sobering thought, I think, ladies and gentlemen. Let's just turn quickly to the parties. The Conservatives. I've already mentioned quite a lot about the Conservatives, so you'll no doubt be relieved to hear that I don't propose to say very much more about them. Apart from, firstly, thoroughly recommend this book by Nadine Dorries, The Plot. Anybody that reads that who doesn't know very much about the internal workings of the Conservative Party will be staggered at just what's going on. Of course, Stephen was mentioning the question of when the general election will be. Rishi Sunak a day or two ago said he wasn't going to have it on the 2nd of May. I would remind you, however, of Bismarck saying, "Nothing is certain until it is officially denied." I was speaking, and just on that topic, I was speaking to a local Conservative Party chairman in Essex. He wouldn't have any access to planning at the centre of the party, but he thought that, and it was his best guess, that the general elections would be on the 2nd of May, and of course if it is, that would impact on our plans for the 2nd of May local elections, which I'll come to later. Turning to Labour, it seems clear that Labour will win the next general election. The main question is what size of majority they will get. And that partly depends on what happens to the SNP in Scotland. Partly also on how far the Conservative Party collapses in the event of an election. Turning therefore to the SNP, when Alex Salmond handed over the leadership of the SNP to Nicola Sturgeon, it seemed as if the SNP had become the natural party of government in Scotland. For years afterwards, Nicola Sturgeon cruised on that legacy. But as she was a far-left ideologue, she increasingly became detached from what any normal Scottish patriot would support. What really finished her off was trying to insist that a convicted rapist should, just because he decided to call himself a woman, that he should therefore go to a female prison. Even her most blinkered supporters found it hard to follow that convoluted, ludicrous and dangerous line of thought. The SNP's fortunes have declined dramatically even since then, with Yousaf Hamza seeking, it seems, to encourage the entire 2 million population of Gaza to be admitted as refugees to Scotland, along with his in-laws. Faced with this lunacy, I should think that the SNP's position will collapse dramatically, which means that Labour will get the benefit of that collapse and an increased majority in the House of Commons. Lib Dems, I've already indirectly mentioned them in the Galloway quote. There's nothing much to say about Lib Dems, except it's worth thinking, almost unthinkable, that they might become the official opposition in the new House of Commons. Reform. Turning now to reform. They seem to be making more and more of a success. And of course, Lee Anderson, the former deputy chairman of the Conservative Party, has now joined them. But this is what a Conservative, Peter Franklin, writing on Conservative Home, wrote about reform, which I think is an interesting and sensible contribution and comment, and reflects what others have been saying too. There is, of course, an overlap between the interests of Reform UK and those of its potential supporters, but the party has done a poor job of focusing on this common ground. The essential context here is the catastrophic failure of the last 3 Prime Ministers to deliver on the offer that won the 2019 general election. Yes, Brexit got done, but the other key components of the winning formula, controlling our borders and levelling up the country, have been betrayed. I'll remind you, this is a Conservative writing. This is an open goal for Reform UK, but they've hardly bothered to take the shot. The focus on immigration should have been relentless, but just look at the party's homepage. It's a heap of soft libertarianism with a garnish of anti-wokery. Immigration gets a single mention. As for anything resembling a levelling up programme or an industrial strategy, we just get a load of green bashing. Blaming net zero for this country's problems has become to the populist right what Brexit is to the Romaniac left. It also forgets that cleaning up the environment and protecting nature are nearly as popular with red wall electorates as they are elsewhere in the country. So I'm claiming that Reform UK doesn't, so am I claiming that Reform UK doesn't matter? Absolutely not, he says. Any party with about 10% of the vote matters, even if the first past the post denies them seats. A glance at long-term poll trends suggests that since the second half of last year, it is Reform, not Labour or the Lib Dems, who are responsible for the decline of the Conservative vote. There's also the possibility that Tice and Farage might do what they need to do to storm the Red Wall. But even if they stay stuck in their rut, they will still exert an influence on the British party system. As the direct inheritor of the Brexit Party and spiritual successor to UKIP, Reform UK is the first port of call for the populist protest vote. The leadership may lack the vision and courage to move beyond this strategic position, but they make it very hard for a hungrier, savvier party to move into. As used to be the case with the Liberal Democrats and the Liberals before them, Reform UK is the bedblocker party. Along with the electoral system, it's an impediment to the raging populism that has disrupted politics elsewhere in Europe. He finishes off, I don't suppose the strategists of Downing Street have ever stopped to thank Farage and co. However, that's only because neither the Sunakites, nor the Trussites, nor the Borisites understand the full extent of their errors. Between them, they've reduced the Conservative Party to a state in which it is acutely vulnerable to replacement by a rival party of the right. That this hasn't happened yet is in no small part due to the influence and limitations of Reform UK. I thought that was an interesting insight into what's going on there. If you're interested in that topic, Katie Hopkins has recently done a video analysing the problems that are likely to be caused by Lee Anderson within Reform. UKIP, we're now in an electoral pact with them, so hopefully we'll avoid standing against each other. And ladies and gentlemen, no doubt to Stephen's relief, that brings me to the English Democrats. In the local May 2nd elections, most of England does have local elections, and I would urge everybody to stand. It's relatively easy to do so in a local election, I've got some of our police commissioner leaflets here, which I'll hand out after I've finished speaking. So far as the more high-profile elections are concerned, we are aiming to stand in regional mayoralties and in police commissionerships. The challenges are similar in both, but there's a bit more help for regional mayoralties, as we can get a double-page spread about us and our candidates in a booklet that does get delivered to every single registered elector in the region. Regional mayors are also the police commissioners for their region, and it is that we want to concentrate on using the ballot paper description. English Democrats, more police, catching criminals. Ladies and gentlemen, we've generally done quite well in police commissioner elections. Last time I got around just short of 43,000 votes, which was 10% of the vote. I spent extremely little on that election, perhaps £2,000, something like that. And that is a constituency, Essex, which has about, I think, 1.9 million voters, so you can imagine that I didn't make much direct contact with any electors. And that was simply budgetary. I think I would need to get at least double that in order to get in with a chance of being elected. The new electoral system for both, I think, mayors and certainly police commissioners is the first past the post, which in fact may in many ways be more helpful in this type of election than the previous system, which was the supplementary vote system, which meant that when I got 43,000 first preference votes, I may well have got another 43,000 second preference votes. So I might already be at about 85,000 in Essex who have voted for me, with a two-thirds collapse of Conservative voters, which is what's happened in most of, well, all the recent by-elections. I probably need to get up to 100,000 in order to be likely to win. We have been leafleting in Essex. I think I'm up to about 25,000 leaflets that have been distributed so far. I mentioned about what would happen if the general elections for the 2nd of May. That would allow us also to stand in our target areas in the general election and get that constituency leafleted by the Royal Mail, so it'd improve our reach. It's worth bearing in mind we did part of the reason we got the directly elected mayoralty of Doncaster a few years ago was because we got into the booklet because we were standing in that, and we also it occurred at the same time as an EU election. We put our candidate up as one of our EU candidates and then did a full leaflet drop across Doncaster using the Royal Mail, focusing entirely on him. And that helped us. That meant we got a double shot of leafleting, which I think probably made us do more effective leafleting than the establishment parties managed to do. So, ladies and gentlemen, as the ambition of the English Democrats is to be the tip of the spear of English nationalism, let us live up to that, to what has been said in that bedrock of traditional English culture, the King James version of the Bible, and so quoting from St Paul's letter to the Ephesians, and in words that David Cameron's appointed head of the Church of England, Justin Welby, would absolutely hate. I read, "Stand therefore, having your loins girt about with truth, and having on the breastplate of righteousness, and your feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Above all, taking the shield of faith, wherewith ye shall be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God." Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.